there, this is Jenny from The Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Today I'm going to show you how to make a 12-inch finished block made up of half square triangles, which are in the corners, and small little flying geese units. This is block 11 of our online quilt along. The pattern is Santa's Village from Thimble Creek Quilts. We have other videos 1 through 10 to teach you how to make each block. We're located in Helena, Montana, and we're going to get started making our block. Let's talk about our block to start. This is a 12-inch finished block. It is made up of half square triangles in the corner. So these are half square triangles. And then this little snippet of color on the corner is a flip and sew square. So we're going to add that after we make our half square triangle. And then the rest of the units are flying geese units. So all of these are flying geese units. They're just rotated. And then we have a center square for the center star. The flying geese units, you need quite a few of them. You need 4 that are with the star points in the background. So you'll need 4 of those. And then you need a lot of this colorway. So there's 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these, 2 of these. And then the ones that are in the corner can be a separate piece of fabric or the same fabric. So in total we need 2, 4, 6, 8 of that colorway. And then we need 2, 4, 6, 8 of that colorway. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 of the other colorway. So lots of flying geese. Those units finish at 1 inch by 2 inches. So they're very small. There is a specialty ruler that will help with that. I'm going to show you that. This unit finishes at 5. So if this is 5 inches finished, 2 inches finished, 5 inches finished, that means we're going to have a 12-inch finished block. So that's the math for the units for the block. This centerpiece is cut at 2.5. It's a 2-inch finished square. So that's going to get you started for the math. Let's go over the supplies you'll need. To collect, you'll need a rotary cutter mat and a couple of rulers. I like a small square ruler. A 7.5 or a 6.5 from Creative Grids is one of my favorite rulers. Fits my hand very nicely. I also use a strip cutter to cut longer strips, but it's small enough that it also fits my hands. So this is a 3.5 by 12.5 and then a 7.5-inch square. Then in regards to the specialty rulers, you'll want a Bloc Loc ruler, which is a half square triangle ruler. You'll want a 6.5 or smaller, no smaller than 5.5, because these get squared up to 5.5. So I actually have a 5.5-inch half square triangle ruler for Bloc Loc, so I can square up all the way around. And then the last specialty ruler is this tiny little guy. It's a 1-inch by 2-inch finished flying geese ruler. This is also made from Bloc Loc. We are going to use a method called 4 at a time, no waste flying geese, since we have to make so many. After we make those units, we'll square them up so they're perfectly sized at 1-inch by 2-inch finished, which means 1.5 by 2.5 inches. The other items that you'll need is some fabric. So we've got some fabric collected. This is the fabrics from our kit that we have at class. We also want some starch alternative. So I use a mister bottle and I combine both Terreal Magic and Best Press. 2/3 amount of this, 1/3 amount of that, and put it in the atomizer bottle so it disperses very evenly, and you'll pre-starch your fabrics before cutting them. You'll want some cutting utensils, which I already talked about, the rotary cutter, but you'll need some thread snips, and then a sewing machine. I'm sewing on a Bernina 740 today. I have Aurifil thread, which is a high quality cotton thread, and I have a 1/4-inch presser foot with dual feed. So the foot I'm using today is 37D. You'll also want a pressing mat and iron. And then the other item that I like to use is a fabric-friendly pen. This is an air erase pen from Sewline, or you can use an iron erase pen from Friction. So you can use either one of those. The nice thing about this is it just disappears over time and you don't have to make sure your marks go away. You'll need your pattern, which is Thimble Creek Quilts Santa's Village, and we'll go ahead and get started. Just a quick review on our block. These are 5-inch finished half square triangles with a flip and sew corner on the outside corner of the background fabric. All of these units are flying geese units, and they finish at 1-inch by 2-inch, and then the center is a 2-inch finish, so that's cut at 2.5. We'll talk about the flying geese here shortly, but we're going to start with the half square triangle unit. That's a 5-inch finished half square triangle unit. We need a total of 4 half square triangle units. The traditional method is to cut a background fabric at 5 7/8 and a dark fabric at 5 7/8. You layer them right sides together, sew on the diagonal line on each side of it, and you should yield a 5.5-inch half square triangle. We're going to use the Bloc Loc method, so we're going to cut them just a little bit larger. So I've actually cut these at 6 1/4. You lay the fabrics right sides together, and then you'll take your strip cutter and you'll mark a line that is diagonally from point to point. You'll sew on each side of that line, and you will yield 2 half square triangle units from this piece. You'll need to do that 2 times so that you yield a total of 4. And once you're finished, you will have a half square triangle unit that looks like this, actually 2 out of this. Do that again so you have a total of 4. Then you'll square this up to 5 1/2 inches. When you lay your fabric down, you'll want to press your seam towards the dark fabric. So in this example, it's pressed towards the green. And then if you can read your ruler and lock it into place, then you'll have it locked in properly on the seam. The beauty of a Bloc Loc is it will stay nice and flat and won't teeter on the seam. And then you'll have a perfect 45-degree point on each end. And with this ruler, this is an exact 5 1/2 inch square, so all I have to do with this one is go around it. So I'm going to just trim around it at 5 1/2. Once you have your block trimmed to 5 1/2 inches, you will then add a square to the corner. So for this example, it's going to be red if you're doing the kit along with us in our quilt along with Saturday Sampler. And this square is cut at 2 inches. It's laid right sides together in the background corner, and you will take a ruler and mark diagonally from point to point. Now when you mark this line, this is exactly where you're going to be sewing, so you want to make sure it's accurate along that 45-degree line from point to point. You will then sew on that line and then flip it out so that you have just a little slice of color on that outside corner. I've marked my 2-inch square diagonally from point to point. I've started on a small piece of fabric, and I'm going to start sewing. Where I'm going to enter the fabric is right on that tip that I've marked. So you're going to feed it in, and you're going to sew right on that line. So carefully take your time and sew right along that line. Once you have sewn diagonally from point to point, when you flip this out, it should line up with your outside edge. So what I would suggest before trimming it off, use your iron and press it out. And then what you can do is either look from the front, and if you look at mine, you can see just a small amount of cream fabric is hanging off. And if I flip it over, I have a little bit of red. So that was just a little error in my sewing from going diagonally from point to point. What you can then do is trim out the excess and then recheck your block to be at 5 1/2. So we'll have already pressed it. I'm now going to trim the seam allowance to 1/4 inch. These small triangles here are discarded, and then when you flip this back out, it should still measure 5 1/2 inches. This is a good time to just double check your measurements and square it up again to make sure that it's going to be accurate. So what I could use again is my 5 1/2 inch half square triangle unit, and I can use that to just square up these edges so that I know I still have a perfect 5 1/2 inch square. We just got our half square triangle units finished with the little corner of color added to the side. So in our kit, we did this really pretty Christmas fabric and then put the corner of color as a red. You could use whatever you want for those corners. Those are cut at 2 inches. And then we're going to work on flying geese units. The center square is a star, and it is made up of a solid square that's cut at 2 1/2 and 4 flying geese units that are 1 1/2 by 2 1/2 unfinished. We'll do the method that is making 4 at a time, and the directions you could follow, you will just do a little bit more cutting, but we'll do the 4 at a time just because it's pretty efficient. Again, we'll use the specialty ruler, a 1 inch by 2 inch finished flying geese ruler from Bloc Loc, and it is made up of fabric A and B. So A is the gold and B is some blue. So in our sample, it is made up of this gold and the blue background, which is a little bit lighter. So this is if you're doing the kit, or if you're grabbing from your stash and you want a gold star, that would be fabric A, and then your flying geese, or this unit right here, would be blue or whatever color you'd like. To make our no-waste flying geese, we will yield 4 units of flying geese. We'll cut a total of 5 pieces of fabric. You'll want 1 large square of the blue and 4 small squares of either your gold or in the next example it'll be a light green, but we're working on our star. So the large square will be blue and the smaller ones will be gold. The measurements for that are from this no waste method that Bloc Loc has published. I'll put a link for this handout in the video, and you can also swing by the store and ask, or you can Google Bloc Loc no waste flying geese. From this chart you will look down at the left hand side and look for the finished size of our flying goose, and for this it is a 1 inch by 2 inch finished flying geese. And you're going to cut 4 small squares at 2 1/8, so that would be out of your gold, and 1 large square at 3 1/2. The rest of the flying geese are made up of blue and background fabric. So in this example, it's a navy with a lighter blue. If you're doing the kit along with us, it's going to be a lighter blue with a light colored grunge fabric as the background. So out of these units, which are, there's 2 here, 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here, those are going to all be made the same. So we're going to use the same math for that we did on the star. And then these are also the same units, they're just rotated so that there's a seam down the center. So if you line up these flying geese, they're point to large center, and then this one is the large ones go together. So it kind of looks like a square and a square block, but there's actually a seam down that. This is in the kit the same color of blue, so it's going to look exactly like this, or you could do something different and do another color of fabric there and put those in the side. So you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you need quite a few flying geese that are all made up the same, or if you want to interject some other fabrics, you certainly may. So let's go over that cutting next. For the rest of the flying geese, you're going to make those out of light green grunge and the light blue. And since we're deviating from the instructions, if you're participating with our online kit and Saturday sampler, we have some very nice instructions to tell you what to pair those with. But in total, you're going to end up cutting this light blue fabric at 3 1/2 inches, and you're going to cut a total of 5 of these. Then you're going to cut a bunch of light green grunge fabric. You'll need 16 of these, and those are cut at 2 1/8. And then you will follow the directions for making no waste flying geese. No waste flying geese, you'll have these 4 fabrics. You'll take first 2 of them. You'll lay them right sides together, lining up the corners. They will overlap in the center. You will then mark a line diagonally from point to point, and it will intersect those 2 corners. So through this point and through that point, and mark that. You will then sew on each side of that line. I'm using the Air Erase pen today, so that mark will go away over time. We'll sew on each side of that line. After sewing on each side of the line with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you'll then cut down the center, so you will yield 2 pieces that look like this. One of the additional squares will go with this piece and the other will go here. You will press this so that it looks like a heart, like that. Once that is pressed, you will then lay the other square right sides together, and you will again mark a line from point to point intersecting those 2 corners, and you will sew on each side of the line. Cut along your center line and you will yield 2 units, so you'll cut along that line. Then you will also press towards that outer triangle like that and like that. That will yield 2, the other half will yield the other 2. Once those units are sewn, you'll want to square them up. So the challenge with flying geese, generally when you're sewing them, when you sew each side, you don't have a straight line, and sometimes you don't have a nice 45-degree diagonal point. So what the beauty of this ruler is, it's going to lock into all of those seams. So you're going to have it locked into the seam. You'll have a 1/4 inch reveal here. You'll also have your 45-degree point on each side. So you're going to have a perfect flying geese. Again, this is the specialty ruler from Bloc Loc that is a 1-inch finished flying geese unit. So I'm squaring up around all 4 sides, and I'm going to rotate my mat just slightly so that I can square up the other side. Once you're done, you'll pull away the excess and you have a perfect flying geese unit. You'll do that to all of your units so that they measure 1 inch by 2 inch finished, or 1.5 by 2.5. You'll also do this method for your gold and your blue with the 1 inch by 2 inch. Remember, this is going to make your star, so I've squared those 2 up, and then you'll square up the other 2, so that will be for the center of your block, making the star. We've talked about all the components for your block for flying geese that will make your star. After you square them up, they'll look like this. Then your half square triangles that have the flip and sew corner will go in the 4 corners. And then you have a lot of flying geese that form these diagonals. So if you're following the kit, these will all be the same. This looks like a square and a square block. It's just the 2 geese are rotated. That would be an additional layout that you could change it to if you'd like to. You could also change this fabric to another fabric and have maybe a unit that looks like so. You could use that from your scraps or maybe from your stash to do another Christmas fabric there. This is a square and a square block, so I'm going to show you another way that you can make a square and a square block using a specialty ruler, or you can use flying geese units and make 4 of them, 2 here, 2 on this side, 2 on this side, and 2 on this side, just for that outer corner, and decide how you want to lay those out. So that is your block. Lots of seams, lots of flying geese. You want to be careful sewing along these seams because you have a nice point that it is squared up to, and you don't want to sew through that point. So just take your time and use your 1/4 inch foot to do that. And I'll show you next how to make a square and a square block if you want to change that to a different unit and not have the center seam. I'm going to show you how to make a 2-inch finished square and a square unit using a specialty ruler from Bloc Loc. This specialty ruler is an HST on point ruler from Bloc Loc, and it goes from a 6-inch square and a square down to a little teeny tiny guy. Today we're going to be doing a 2-inch. What they've done with this ruler is they've eliminated the math so that you don't have to know what size to cut these triangles or what size to cut the square. You just use measurements on the ruler. So today we want to make a 2-inch finished square and a square block. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut 3 squares. One is going to be the center, and 2 will make up these triangles on the outside. The cool thing is all these squares are exactly the same size. So I'm going to line up my fabrics and get ready to cut those. To make this 2-inch finished square and a square block, I'm going to cut my center square and my 2 outside squares, and they're all cut from exactly the same size. So I'm going to use some measurements on the ruler to cut that, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see that measurement. I'm zoomed into my fabric. I have my center square and 2 layers of my background fabric, kind of have them stacked up on top of each other. And I'm going to use the measurement that says 2 inches on this ruler, and I'm going to cut 3 squares, all the exact same size. So I'm going to cut here. I'm also going to cut over on the other side. Then I'll remove the excess, and then I will square that up so that I'm on that measurement of 2 by 2. So I just trim that little bit of excess off. Now, the background fabric you're going to cut in half diagonally. So I'm going to stack those and use my ruler to line up along the point, and then it's going to intersect each point, and I'm going to cut that in half diagonally. Then those are the triangles that go on the outside of my square. The first step is you'll sew 2 triangles to opposite sides. They'll lay right sides together, and you want that point to line up in the center. So one thing that you can do is fold this in half and finger press it so that you have a small crease running down the center of your block. Then the point will line up with that crease. You're going to sew on this side, and then you'll line up the other opposite side and sew 1/4 inch on that side. Once you've sewn 1/4 inch on each side, you will flip these out and press them so that they lay flat. Then you'll get ready to sew the other 2 sides. You'll lay those right sides together, and one will go on this side, making sure that you're in the center of the block, and do the opposite side and sew 1/4 inch on those 2 sides. After sewing on opposite sides, you'll set your seams and press those next background fabrics out, and then we'll square up the block. Now remember, we used a specialty ruler to do this. We used the Bloc Loc HST on point. So that was this specialty ruler, Bloc Loc HST on point ruler, and we used just the measurements on the ruler to create a 2-inch finished square in a square. How this unit is trimmed is using a flying geese ruler, and you lock it into the seam and trim around it. So you trim all the way around it and create a 2-inch finished half square triangle, or 2-inch finished square in a square. The other thing that you can do is you can use a square ruler to trim it up. So I'm just going to do those 2 sides and then show you what it would look like if you squared up with a square ruler. If you square up using a square ruler, what you want to pay attention to is making sure that you have a 1/4 inch reveal for your seam allowance. And remember, this unit is going to get squared up to 2.5. So you will trim 2 sides, not much trimming because I had already done that. And then you'll rotate it and use your square ruler again. You'll line up the 2.5 inch along this edge that you just trimmed, and then make sure that you have a 1/4 inch reveal on each side. So this is one way that you can make a square in a square unit, and it's a 2-inch finished unit. The other way that you can do it is you can make the flying geese just as directed in the pattern and sew them together so that they have a seam down the center. So it's up to you how you want to do that. Let's look how it looks in our block. Here's the beginning of our block getting sewn together. So we've got our star in the center, half square triangles, and then some flying geese here. These are square in a square blocks, which we just sewed using the specialty method, and a little bit of scrap fabric from our green or a scrap fabric from our stash. You could also do like the pattern directs and use 2 flying geese units and line them up like that. You could also do a square in a square block using the blue fabric, and that would be a unit that looks like that. So it's up to you how you want to create that. The other fun thing about this is you can rotate how those blocks are arranged and rotate how the block looks by just moving the flying geese around. So play with that layout and decide how you want your block to look when you're all finished. We just finished making our block 11 from Santa's Village. We learned how to make half square triangle units, add a little corner of color, make lots of flying geese units, and arrange our block in a different manner. We also discussed how to make a square in a square block using a specialty ruler for these outside edges. I'm excited to see what you make with your blocks. This is Jenny from The Sewing Palace. We have lots of videos on our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe to that. And we have our class coming up this weekend if you want to stop by and visit us in the store. Again, this is Jenny from The Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Thanks for joining me today. Bye-bye.